So Sonal, just introduce yourself briefly to those people who don't know you.
Sure. Hi, I'm Sonal Patel. I'm the Managing Director of AppNexus, based here in Singapore.
There you go. And
Thank you, team.
and a female speaker, which is good. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. So basically, we want to talk about sort of the overview of the market here. Sonal's obviously been working in the region for a very long time, has held numerous roles, has been in the space for quite some time, particularly in programmatic. So just want to get sort of an overview, Sonal, on sort of the market here, Southeast Asian programmatic market, right? Particularly sort of your learnings from your previous role and the role you're in. So just let's do an overview of where we are at the market, where we're going.
Sure. So for those who don't know me, I've been here for, almost 9 years. So I'm a lifer here in Singapore. My role...
How do you define a lifer in Singapore, by the way?
Anybody over 5 years.
Wow, okay. So are we all lifers in the room? Yeah. Put your hands up if you're a Singapore lifer. Wow, okay.
Wow, 3.
3 people. And they're all Australian. Anyway, sorry.
So I came out here with Right Media many years ago, which Yahoo acquired. Led sort of the Right Media team here in terms of programmatic. Now in APAC, that was almost 8 to 9 years ago. This was a market that was still dependent on time of day. So cost per day was still prevalent here, especially in Indonesia. And to see where we have rapidly gone in the next sort of 9 years has been impressive, to say the least. I think one of the challenges is that if we've come from other markets like the UK or the US, digital has sort of been propagated by sort of e-commerce. If you think about sort of what's happening in the UK, e-commerce is leading the evolution when it comes to digital. And of course, anybody who'd been here 8 to 9 years ago would have realized there was no e-commerce. Everybody wanted to go out and buy their handbag or buy their shopping outside in a mall. And so we've started to see this massive change. And this change has actually led to a lot more digital spend happening within mobile, within video. And I think what we're seeing here is a tipping point where mobile actually may be the first sort of market that will lead in programmatic fully compared to some of the Western markets now. So it's a massive evolution. So,
the mobile thing's been talked about quite a lot, and it could be overstated quite a bit, but the amount of people who sort of access media here and content via mobile is huge compared to the rest of the world. So, I mean, how has that sort of affected strategy around mobile buying? Because there is an issue, particularly in mature markets like the UK and Europe, where you have a situation where people are just buying Facebook and effectively they're buying mobile, right? So they don't really think about other sites. They just buy through a proxy like Facebook. So if you buy desktop, you can buy mobile as well because it's cross-device. So how has that sort of changed the strategy here?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I think a few years ago, we saw Facebook, just the eCPMs on Facebook were ridiculous if you're a gaming client or somebody trying to buy e-commerce users. So what tended to happen is you get to a tipping point where it's just expensive to buy on Facebook. So that demand would then go into some of the ad networks. It would go into the likes of Twitter. MoPub came into play here. And so what we started seeing is that Facebook obviously realized that they had this huge demand, but they didn't have the supply. So obviously the relationship there was Facebook created Facebook ad network. So there was a threat. It became imminent, especially in our region. And we started seeing Facebook started to realize that they had data that they could literally liberally sprinkle across some of the publishers and be able to bring the right type of ROI.
And there's some interesting companies here as well. I mean, I don't know, Cheetah Mobile are really an interesting company that I only came across recently. They are effectively build apps for phone, so basically like locks, phone locks, etc. But they have like 400 million active users per month. So there does seem to be an awful lot of mobile-first media companies here. And it's funny to call Cheetah Mobile a media company, but it feels that way, that, the new media businesses in this region aren't necessarily content business, but there could be gaming apps or there could be utility apps like Cheetah. So, I mean, how does that change? I mean, how does that sort of fit into the broader sort of mobile piece here in Asia?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you're absolutely right. Some of the app developers are now getting into the ad tech space. They realize that they can't just pivot with the 2 or 3 apps that they have. They have to think about the longevity of what they're trying to do. So you see a lot of app developers now starting to get into M&A. And if they're getting into M&A, that's a further squeeze on ad tech. But then the contrary is, does ad tech have the right tools in place to be able to effectively evangelize mobile? Are we looking at sort of dispelling some of the walled gardens that we see within mobile? And these are some of the things that are now starting to come up. And these companies are now starting to challenge that.
Yeah, and ad tech seems to have no clue about mobile. I'll say it again. It is completely clueless about mobile, and I'll tell you why. They seem to be graphing a desktop model on top of mobile. So more MPUs, more banners, right? More cookie-based targeting. That's not going to work. I mean, do you think that sort of ad tech needs to look at mobile in a completely different way? In the way it's a very much a user-first experience, that we need to start thinking laterally about how we actually monetize mobile and how we work with these new media companies?
The short answer is yes. And the reason for this is, honestly, I think what we've seen in the landscape is that everything has come from a digital first or a display first ecosystem. And when that happens, you see a lot of challenges when it comes to thinking about sales channel conflict, for example. A good example would be as a well-known publisher in this region who effectively used to give away free inventory on mobile because they saw no value in it. And the reason for that was because it was propping up their display-first business. Now, that's fine, but if your users are becoming more and more mobile, should you be propping up that business, or should you be thinking about it the other way around, which is actually starting to think about the user, the fact that the user is actually using multiple hardware devices. It's not just one. We have to think about cross-attribution. And these are sort of thoughts that ad tech players have not really thought about. Channel conflict, that's well known because programmatic has always had that with direct sales teams. But when we think about all the other challenges with hardware, software, the fact that there's multiple devices, the fact that there's fragmentation, there's a lack of attribution associated to mobile, it's difficult for them to be able to navigate through that ecosystem.
And just shifting the gears a little bit, because this year AppNexus has been a big advocate of header bidding, right? We've seen header bidding basically emerge as a means to sort of disrupt the DFP hegemony, right? I don't know, I'm sure a lot of people here are ops people will understand how limited DFP is in terms of sort of proper yield optimization. But I just want to talk about the header bidding piece, because you've released an open source wrapper, prebid.js. How do you see that trend of header bidding, which is now pretty big in the US and getting pretty strong in the UK and in Europe? How do you see that sort of trend evolving here? Are publishers looking for that piece of technology here in this market?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think when you look at some of the respective markets outside of APAC, there is a dialogue going on in the marketplace where they're thinking about, is it right to go with someone who is walled garden, the likes of Google, the likes of Facebook, or should we be thinking about where the user is? Publishers generally think about their users. They don't necessarily think about the fact that their users are data or data assets. Your user is going to be promiscuous. So effectively, you should be thinking about the data because that's what you're going to actually own. And in a walled garden ecosystem, you don't own your data. There's limitations because your data gets to a certain point and it's walled gardened. By having something like header bidding, it's an open ecosystem. There are 12 or 13 various partners working on this, and it allows them to be able to try and get into this waterfall, which has been closed off. And by allowing that to happen, you start understanding the value of your user or your data. But in a walled garden relationship, how are you going to manage that? You just can't because you don't get to see beyond that garden.
And Rachel alluded in our introduction today about in-app in-app sales, basically, monetization is huge here in APAC for mobile-first publishers. Now, you released a header bidder tech for in-app. Can you just talk a little bit about that? Because it's quite interesting, because I never really thought about that at all. I just assumed that Facebook, given its reach and its data that's available, would basically take the lion's share of all those sort of monetization. But I actually discovered that a lot of the in-app guys are actually using an ad server, right? So a lot of the apps are using DFP to monetize these various demand partners. So let's talk about that sort of in-app tech, because I think that's quite interesting, because we were talking about Facebook, Google taking the lion's share of a lot of the budget, but if you start introducing that into an in-app ecosystem, it gets really interesting, because then you can introduce more demand partners into that equation.
So absolutely, I think let's take one step back. What are the challenges right now that we're seeing with monetization across in-app? The biggest one is, of course, it's a closed ecosystem. You're only going to get certain partners that you can work with.
Yeah.
So again, the Facebooks and the Googles.
And the Twitters.
And Twitter and Mopub, yes.
Let's not forget Twitter.
I'm ex-Twitter, for those of you who don't know. So I think that's the first challenge. The second challenge is around owning the data. Because you have this walled garden, you don't know where the data is. The third challenge is around latency. Any app developer is most unlikely, actually, to want to have an additional app placed into their app, because it bloats the app. And in this region, of course, you do not want to bloat the app, because, of course, it causes latency. So by having header bidding, and within AppNexus, the header bidding for in-app is called price check. By having this solution, you're effectively having a module that sits within the app that in the background sort of pre-caches what we would call a bid request. So what is the price? And would pre-cache what we would call a creative URL. By pre-caching this and not going through sort of an SDK, you allow yourselves to have the ability to then drip feed that information into the waterfall, whichever is the highest value of all those demand partners that are on price check.
Yeah.
That then goes into the waterfall and allows you to now start realizing what is the value of your impression from an outside opportunity into the walled garden. And this gives you the ability to understand the value of your user.
It's all about making these guys compete, though, for the impression, really, isn't it? Because if you give all your inventory away on a guaranteed basis, that's great, right? That's guaranteed income. But the reality is, if you have, maybe 10, 20 demand partners competing for that impression, you could increase yield. I mean, it just seems like a logical thing to do.
Absolutely, and because price check or header bidding for in-apps does not have an SDK, it means it's much faster. You're actually getting multiple bids all at the same time, and whoever's the highest or whatever's the highest will then go into the ecosystem. And that's the kind of evolution that we're seeing. And we're also realizing the older sort of partners that were out there, like the Mopub to some degree, of course AdSense, AdMob to some degree. You're seeing price fluctuations now, and now more so than any other time, app developers don't actually have the user acquisition budgets they had 6 months ago, a year ago. So monetization is key now. Yield management is their number one priority.
And are publishers looking for this from you? I mean, the conversations you have with regional mobile publishers, are they looking for this type of tech?
The sophisticated ones are, and one of them you mentioned. The others... Cheetah. The others, I think they're still new. So, if you think about app developers, they're not kind of the old display first publishers. These are brand new publishers that come into the ecosystem, don't know anything about ad tech, and are just trying to think about the way to survive and bring on the users. So when we think from that perspective, they're not going to be necessarily understanding what they need to do to be able to get the yield that they want. So it's up to us as an industry to help and encourage them.
It's fascinating to do. These publishers are now the de facto publishers. Like, they're not even proper, but I don't mean that in a kind of a bad way, but they're not even publishers' content. Like, it is fascinating to see that move. And particularly here in APAC, where you do have a lot of mobile innovation, seems to be shifting gears around that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that app developers have to remember is they're going to be number one or somewhere in the top ecosystem for a certain amount of time, and then somebody else is going to come along. So app developers have to continually develop new apps to stay ahead. Mm-hmm. They can then cross-promote some of these apps across to their new apps, the app users or vice versa. That helps them keep that continual loop. But in the same respect, we're seeing display-first publishers now starting to realize their kind of premise is now being challenged, and they have to think about, how do I manage the user? You can't manage the user, they're promiscuous. So what you have to do is manage the data that comes with the user.
So the other big trend for you guys this year was video. You're pushing strongly into video. I'm just curious about the programmatic video market here in APAC, particularly in mobile. You're seeing a lot of interesting stuff happening at the minute, particularly King.com. I don't know if you're aware, but King.com are obviously Candy Crush. I'm sure everybody in this phone and this crowd has probably got Candy Crush on their phone, but they're trying to launch a new media business alongside that, which could be worth a lot of money, and they're trying to do something a little bit different. So they're doing rewards video as opposed to interruptive video. So just talk about that trend in the programmatic video piece, right? How do you see that evolving here? Is that going to be a really big sweet spot for mobile publishers?
Yes and no. Yes, because rewarded video really works for gaming clients, right? This is where you play the game and effectively you get to a certain level and you either have to buy a jewel or you have to buy an additional life. Now, some people are not going to actually put their credit card into that app. They're just not going to do it. You're going to get to a point where you have to think about, as a publisher, how do I incentivize this app developer to be able to encourage me to actually buy a life? It's not going to happen. So what the app developer does instead is they create a rewarded video. And what this does is you watch a video, you watch 2 or 3 videos, and effectively you get credits that allow you to get that additional life. That's definitely going to prop up the market for the gaming clients.
But not from the other publishers, effectively.
Exactly. So what we'll see instead from the other publishers is other ways that they can reward or other ways they can think about incentivizing the user. One of them is to give them free content. Mm-hmm. You get to a certain point, you read a free article, now you want to read the additional article, you have to watch something, a video.
That's an interesting one. So basically, instead of getting them to pay for content, you basically say, you've read 2 articles, now watch this video at £15 CPM. Or £25 CPM, whatever, maybe £150 CPM. It depends on who you're selling to. That there is a market for incentivizing the content. Do you see that working?
I don't know if I see it working because when you're reading content, it's a different way that you're engaging with the content. When you're when you're playing a game, you really want to get to the next level. So there's that kind of impact that is already made from the get-go when it comes to the game. But with content, you might get to a certain point and you might just say, well, I'll try and find whatever I wanted to read somewhere else.
Right.
Which is what actually happens when you think about yourself as a user. I think what we will see from digital-first publishers is that there is a need for video. Many people here in this region live with their families. There's many different devices they use to consume video. So one of the ways to think about it is that IStream is going to become hot. That's what I think is going to happen.
Do you think IStream is going to be big here?
I think so, because there is a lot of demand for video, and we don't have a lot of content. A lot of ad space for video right now. So you have to create that video spot, and that's going to come from digital publishers who will do that. And
do you see the demand here for that? I would say that in the UK and the US, IStream is very, very popular. But the problem I see is that a lot of publishers won't put it into their content because of the user experience of it all. Even though I think IStream's great, I love it. Big fans of Teeds, obviously. But I'm just saying, do you think that that's going to be a problem here in terms of supply? Because I think the demand is there, because I hear the CPMs are really, really high. By the way, CPMs are really high for IStream. If any publishers here, get on it. It's fucking ridiculous. Will there be an issue there, do you think?
So I think there is a lot of demand, and I think that demand will drip feed naturally into AppStream. What I think is going to be the challenge for the publisher is managing the balance of the yield management versus the annoyance of the user. I don't, personally, AppStream can be annoying if you're fully engaged into an article. So you have to kind of almost chop and change the way that you're thinking about bringing AppStream to certain articles. You can't just say, I'm going to plock it onto X, Y, and Z article. You really want to do some due diligence as to how the user engages with those particular articles, and then think about AppStream.
But the IStream thing, though, would that be a sort of killer on data plans, effectively, or how was? I mean, given this region, the people are not using smartphones everywhere. Will that be a hindrance as well?
To some degree, yes. I mean, AppStream can pre-cache as well. But I think one of the challenges is that I wouldn't say one of the challenges. What we're seeing right now is that a lot of the countries, in particular, are starting to offer free Wi-Fi. Of course, the free Wi-Fi is not going to be as great because there's latency attached to that. But generally, we're seeing that sort of progress out into the marketplace. Data is becoming cheaper. We're also seeing that data in certain parts of APAC, or in Southeast Asia in particular, there's a trading going on in terms of the way that telco partners are now starting to think about leveraging the use and the engagement with their user.
Yeah, because isn't there an Australian firm who was funded by good old Rupert Murdoch, good lad that he is, unlocking the phone. So if you unlock the phone, you see an ad. You see more of that happening. Then you get reduced data plans from telco.
I do see that happening, and I think it's going to become more and more prevalent, especially as in certain countries you're seeing, folks essentially take out their SIM card, throw it away, bring a new SIM card that has an additional data plan for free. So you're going to see promiscuous users. You're going to see promiscuous use of data to some degree, but you're also going to see incentivization happening from some of the publishers and advertisers to be able to extrapolate that.
So one last final question. I loved Alex Kahn's presentation. He actually talked about open systems, never mentioned AOL once in the whole presentation, which was quite clever in many ways. So, but we all knew he was AOL because he works for AOL. So, just on the open versus closed thing, I mean, that seems to be a real bugbear. And obviously your whole premise has been open, an open system. So how do you see that fitting into this region? Like, I mean, we talked about earlier, full stack versus modularity. So the word of the day is modularity. Can I plug and play different pieces of ad tech into my own stack? So how do you see that fitting out here?
Yeah, it's in AppNexus's DNA to be open, transparent, a full system that allows any publisher to be able to extrapolate as much yield as they'd like. I think it's going to take some time. And I think the reason for it taking so time is you have to evangelize. You have to think about all the challenges and nuances with a walled garden system. But at the same time, you have to think about what are the tools that the publisher has to be able to extrapolate on, utilizing someone like AppNexus. They have to understand that there's all these tools. Again, I think one of the gentlemen today on the panel mentioned that we bring all the tools, but only 20% is utilized. So it's effectively a point in case that we have to get better at being able to evangelize that. But at the same time, publishers need to think about their longevity. And if they're not ultimately getting as much as they can, they're going to get to a point where how are you going to be able to fund the content if you're not getting the right type of yield? How are you going to continually sort of percolate the fact that you're getting you're getting essentially a certain amount of yield, but how are you going to effectively be able to get the right type of content? And then how are you going to be able to extrapolate that content through data to show the right content to the right user at the right time?
So there's a lot of evangelizing to be done, clearly. Sonal, thanks very much. We're out of time. So round of applause for Sonal, and she is now AppNexus's queen in this region. So if you want to talk to her later on, she'll be available for networking drinks. Thanks very much, Sonal.
Thank you.